Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to clean up some last-minute things that we have inside of our store. And also, I'm going to talk a little bit more about logging inside of Redux, because we have many options throughout the years. First off, what I want to do is mention that we actually have our own logger middleware, as we know, as well as Redux Logger. We can really pick and choose which one we prefer. It's up to you. If you want to use Redux Logger, which is what I actually prefer to use, again, just keep in mind that we need to get the results using next.action, and only then are we able to actually get the next state. So when you look at your code, as we've gone through extensively, you may not see the order of your actions and the code inside of your components rendering in a way that seems super predictable. If you feel like you don't like that, of course, you can write your own logger middleware, as we've seen, and using this, you can figure out and get a more accurate depiction of what you want your actions to be. So what I want to do is I want to move this middleware that we've made into a middleware folder. And now we always have access to it. I'm going to similarly call it logger.js, export this out. And now, if you want it, just import it. Otherwise, personally, I'm just going to use Redux Logger, and I'm going to pass this middleware here. Now, one other thing I want to mention is that we should only be running this logger middleware when we're in development. When we're in production, we don't want to console log anything to the logs. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually leverage the process.environment.node environment variable, which is something that we always have access to that tells us whether or not we're in development or production based on the string development or production, like so. So if our node environment is currently development, only then should we render the logger. Now, of course, if this is untrue, where our node environment is equal to production, what happens is we never actually end up evaluating logger, but we just get false. And we don't want to pass false as a middleware. So we need to make sure that we also filter out by Boolean. What this does is essentially it filters out anything where it is not true. So if we come here, I want to quickly show you an example. So let's say, for example, we have this value 2 equals 3. As you can see that I was starting to type out. What I'm going to say is that ampersand here as well, I'm just going to put an object. And inside this object, I'm going to say A goes to string like this. Notice that this is equal to false, which is what we expect. Now, if I put this inside of an array, if I .filter this and I pass Boolean, what will happen is it will remove anything that's got false or falsiness into it. So now we are filtering out if this is false. If this is true, however, what happens instead is that we will get the actual object inside. So this is how we keep the middleware if we are indeed evaluating in development. And now our middleware is going to only apply when we're actually inside of development, which we see right here. When I refresh, there's our Redux Logger. If I want to see that it's actually working, I can just flip this to production. And now if I save this, there we go. We see that no matter what happens, none of these actions are now logging. So this is some optimizations we can make to make sure that we hide our logger. Again, if you want to use Redux Logger, you can. If you want to use middleware logger, you can as well. Now, if you want this to be a little bit more clear, we want to switch this back so that we're in development. You can also say that if the node environment is also just not in production, don't render the logger. This one is also a little bit more clear because sometimes you might have other additional environments determined for you. You can actually add more environments if you wanted to. It just depends on your project. So this is actually the safest one. We essentially say, as long as we're not in production, render the logger. If we are, don't use it. Now, there is one more tool that a lot of different projects like to use. It's kind of a mixture. It is actually a Chrome extension that does require us to interact with it in order for us to utilize it. And I'll show you how that one works as well. So if you look inside your resources folder, I have a link to this extension called Redux Devtools only in Chrome. So you want to add it to Chrome. And then the way it works is that you'll get this little Chrome extension icon that only triggers if the web page is enabled for Redux Devtools. The way that you set up a website so that it actually can use Redux Devtools is that here inside of your store, you need to modify the compose method. You modify it in the sense that you determine whether or not you want to use Redux's compose or the Devtools compose. So the way that you write this code is you say const compose enhancer. Essentially, it just says, hey, I have this compose method that I'm going to use, and I'm going to determine which one to use. If the process.environment.node environment does not equal production. So very similar to what we saw before. We don't want to use this if we're in production. If we're not, then it's okay. So if we're not in production and we have a window object, because during our build step, there's no window object on the server. So for this reason, we don't want to break our code. So we want to make sure that we say, hey, only if there's a window object and window_redux_redux_devtools_extension_compose_. So this right here is a protected keyword. And what we're saying is that if we're not in production and there's a window object and these DevTools exist. So DevTools as a Chrome extension is going to attach this to the window object, which is their own compose. Then use this compose. Otherwise, just use the compose that we have from Redux. And now what we do is we call our compose enhancer instead of compose. If these fail, then we'll use regular compose just as we had before. Otherwise, run the actual one from Redux DevTools. And now what happens if we've rebuilt properly is if we go back to our application, what we can see if we refresh is that inside, we see that our DevTools is highlighted. If I click this now, notice how this new tab opens, or not new tab, but this little modal. Inside of here, we can see all of the different events that happened and at what time they happened. These all happened within very quick milliseconds. And now we can actually look at the action itself. Here we see that there's a set current user. This was the action. It had this type. It had this payload. This was the state that we had after we had updated. If we look at the diff, we can see what values got changed on what reducer. We see that in the user reducer, the current user value went from null to this payload object. Similarly, what we can also do is we can use this timeline to jump through the different portions of our application while the Redux state was being modified. So this might not be as clear, but let's say, for example, I go to my shop, I add some more items here, and I go to checkout. And what I'll do is I will modify these values. I will remove some of these values. And now, if we go back and we reopen Redux DevTools, we see there's a bunch of these set cart items method that happened. We can technically skip through and look at how our application state changed based on these actions that fired. So this gives us control over the application state based on all of these different actions that are firing through Redux. So this dev tool is really good if you want to see and you're manipulating very complex Redux state, just what's happening at every step, what's getting modified, and you'll notice that your application, in fact, reflects accordingly, because this is directly modifying the reducers so that you can see the state that's being modified in turn. So there we go. This is Redux DevTools, another very popular tool. You can feel free to use whichever ones you want. You can use a combination of them. It's really up to you. The world is your oyster. So now we've learned the majority of setting up Redux by itself and how to use Redux inside of our application. In the next video, what we're going to start covering is actually some additional Redux libraries that you may encounter in your journey as a developer. Only at scale, though. I do want to mention that a lot of these projects that you work on, only at scale will you start using the next libraries we're going to talk about. So I'll see you in the next video.